My name is Ryan Cam, and welcome to a special Black Friday edition of the 1999 Project. Please don't run over anyone in the stores. That TV is not worth hurting someone. But I've got a lot of movies to cover this weekend, so let's get cracking. And starting off with one that I genuinely think, considering who directed it and who stars in it, it doesn't get nearly talked about quite enough. It's called Sleepy Hollow. This was directed by Tim Burton. We all know who he is, and it stars too many people to mention, like in one breath. Like Johnny Depp is the main star, and this is based on the Washington Irving short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It tells the story of Ichabod Crane, played by Depp, who is sent by a corrupt judge, played by Christopher Lee. Nice get on Tim Burton's part, to the town of Sleepy Hollow, which is not so sleepy. They are being terrorized by the Headless Horseman, played by Christopher Walken. Yes, really. And it's up to Crane to figure out what all is going on with that. But joining me for this review, making his channel debut, and I'm so happy to have him on, from the channel Mega Movie Z, it's Zach Shelton. Zach, thank you for joining me.
Good. One correction. Movie Fan Z is the title. I think you're thinking of.
That's why
Yeah.
I was
But that,
looking up
that
I was looking up your
yeah,
channel name and I was like, I'm just gonna
yeah.
read off the name.
No, that's fine. Yeah, Movie Fan Z. I'm glad to be on here. This is a movie I actually saw for the first time about a month ago for the Halloween season, and it was a lot better movie than I expected. So I'm interested and excited to talk about it.
Into the Thanksgiving time of '99, it was getting crowded, and 1999 has not disappointed in terms of when people say it's the best year ever for movies. I would put like this and like 94 in the conversation. 99 is just stupid with gems both large and small. But Sleepy Hollow is one that I've covered on the channel already for a Scary Mania a couple years back. I liked it then, and I'm glad I rewatched it because I fell in love with it all over again. I think Tim Burton did a great job, and Tim Burton, we can talk about it if you want to, but Tim Burton is someone, he's done some bad movies, yes, but so has every director. When he's on and when he is in like his wheelhouse, he does some good stuff. I think we both can agree.
I can definitely agree. For all the ones that I've watched, this is one of his top movies in my opinion. So there's still some I haven't seen, but for the ones I've seen, this is definitely near the top.
Yeah, but like I said, this cast is massive. Johnny Depp is the big star. Like he plays Ichabod Crane. But then you got Christina Ricci, Michael Gambon, who a couple years after this would be Professor Dumbledore in the Harry Potter series, replacing Richard Harris. And earlier in '99, he would end up starring in The Insider. So Michael Gambon was having a pretty busy year. You got Casper Van Dien in the movie. You got Richard Griffiths in the movie. Vernon Dursley. There's another Harry Potter pickup there. Ian McDermott, Chancellor Palpatine slash Darth Sidious. He was having a busy year too. He was in the Phantom Menace earlier in the year, and now he's in this. Michael Goff is in there. I'll talk about why that's a pretty good get in just a bit. Christopher Walken is there primarily in flashbacks, but he is there, and all his dialogue is ah like that's literally all his dialogue, folks. He does not say a word. But that was
I
a
mean, is that really a bad thing though? Like you get Christopher
no.
Walken and there you go.
No, like Tim Burton, like is a genius just for casting him as the Headless Horseman. Like, you know what? I want my Headless Horseman to be Christopher Walken. And speaking of Christopher, Christopher Lee is also in this as well. I have nothing but love and respect for that man. He only has one scene. Please keep that in mind. If you're going into this for a lot of Christopher Lee, I'm sorry to say he is in the movie primarily just to send Ichabod Crane to the town of Sleepy Hollow. That doesn't change the fact that the awesomeness of Christopher Lee is present, and that goes and like he only has one scene, but he's there for the one scene and it's great. So you got a loaded cast and Tim Burton just understanding what he wants to do with this. A very gothic, a very supernatural take on the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which is already kind of a supernatural story to begin with. Then he just takes it down the dark path, which is what he tends to always do.
And one thing that's it's not in my review, but one thing that I kind of liked is that he didn't go like Tim Burton didn't go overboard with it. It was a straightforward story. Like you've seen some Tim Burton movies where he just goes all out. This one,
Mhm.
you got those supernatural elements, but like he kind of keeps it grounded too. So that's one good thing about this movie as well.
It's literally about Captain Jack Sparrow trying to find the Headless Horseman. It should be more crazy than it is, but it's really not. I don't know why I was thinking of this, but here goes. It kind of reminded me of Hot Fuzz a little bit when Nick Angel gets sent to the town because he's too good at his job. It's kind of similar to what Ichabod Crane is. Like he starts out in New York City in 1799. He is very much a forward-thinking investigator. He's doing CSI stuff before that was even a thing, and nobody likes him for it. And so they basically give him the must-lose assignment of trying to find the Headless Horseman, and that investigation bears more fruit than he anticipates.
But also with that, you get to learn more about his character too with his flashbacks and one other thing I liked, and we'll get more into this, I believe, is there's so many different twists and turns, but throughout there, it's like I was still like engaged the entire time. So
I
I
love
enjoy the twists. So
No, I thought they all worked pretty well too, and I loved seeing seeing Ichabod Crane's visions of like seeing his father and then seeing his mother in what I think is an Iron Maiden. It's a medieval torture device, and I'm sure I'll look it up later and figure out, oh, that's not an Iron Maiden, but it's the chamber where someone goes and then it's full of spikes, and then it like closes and you just see their eyes. Like it's that one.
yeah, I think that's what it's called, but I don't know off the top of my head. So, but
You don't expressly see it, but Crane ends up going into like not a maiden, but into one of those chairs where it's full of just nothing but spikes, and you see like the spikes on marks on his hand, which is just a crazy touch. So Crane's got some issues, but he buries them in his work pretty much. I didn't really know where the movie was going. Like, for example, I'll talk about a movie that I'm going to be talking about a little later, The World Is Not Enough, where I figured out the twist in that movie within the first 15, 20 minutes. With Sleepy Hollow, I had no idea like where it was all headed. I had a rough idea, but I was still shocked by it, if that makes any sense.
and along with that, like with the twist, it's like you think it's going one way, and then it turns, and then it just like you just like you said, you don't know where this story is going, but you're along for the ride.
I agree. And then you got this, like I said, this is a very gothic movie. It plays into Tim Burton's wheelhouse. This is essentially his tribute to Hammer Horror, which is Hammer Studios based out of the UK. From the late 50s to the early to mid 70s, they were producing a lot of very cutting edge horror films. They were the first ones that brought Frankenstein and Dracula into color, and they upped the blood. Lots and lots of blood. Now, let me just be clear in saying this is not like a gore fest. This is not like a Saw film. But when the movie uses blood, it uses it efficiently. I think the scene that got me the most was when Crane and the little boy that he's looking after are at the tree, where the tree is full of blood. And so he's chopping away at the tree, and the blood is just getting all over him. And then you just remove the bit of the bark, and you just see severed heads. That's just an insane visual.
You already have the supernatural element. You don't need the gore and the overabundance of blood. It's all working with the mind more, and that works in this movie.
One thing I did appreciate was that I love how the town didn't like go on to like this guy doesn't belong here. He's from the city. So like I'm glad they didn't do that. There's a little friction, but I think that has more to do with Michael Gambon trying to protect what he knows, and I'm just going to leave it at that. It doesn't go full hot fuzz where like the whole town is conspiring against Nick Angel, the greater good, and all of that. It doesn't do that.
Yeah, in a way, from what I remember, they kind of, in a way, like forget about him. It's just like he's just another citizen there, and it's just like he does. Like they don't do anything to go out of their way, um, for him, but that works in his favor. Like nobody's there to impede what he's doing.
I love how you pointed out they just kind of forget about him. They just kind of accept him like, oh, he's just here to do a job. Like that's about it. So I'm it was very much a cliche of like, oh, he's new, so clearly he's like not to be trusted. No, they just like, hey, we got a big problem here and we hope you're here to fix it. And
Yes.
Crane does a pretty good job in fixing it. But another thing I did appreciate was that Crane's not some super detective. Like he has to work to figure out everything. And he's just courageous enough to face down these situations, but he's not like immune to being scared of what all is going on. The thing that got me was the scene near the middle of the movie where the horseman is attacking him. Like he slices off the head of one of the characters, and the head lands in Crane's lap. And
Yeah.
then Horseman's riding by, picks up the head with the sword and rides off. And like Crane is just terrified the whole time. So they do a good job of establishing that Ichabod Crane is scared in this moment, but he's not like so out of it that he's like I still got a job to do. So I liked that.
Yeah, I was gonna also bring that up too. It's just like you could tell he's a Ichabod Crane is human. He's not super powered, or he's not like this, like you said, a super detective. He's just someone that is very logical, but he does get scared, and he is human after all. So, and that's again, that's something you want in a movie like this.
I couldn't agree with you more too. I've got a lot of movies to cover, so I'm just going to cap it here. But at the end of the day, I want to go on record in saying this is one of more Tim Burton's more underrated and overlooked films. Tim Burton's a very hot and cold director, Zach. I think you can agree with me on that. He's
Yes.
got some great ones and some terrible ones, and seemingly with like no in between. Like the in between, I think you got like Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, like like maybe a couple more that I'm forgetting, like Big Eyes. He did that with Christoph Waltz and Amy Adams. But it's like he takes big swings, which I appreciate. But then on one hand, you got like something like Beetlejuice or Corpse Bride, but then you got the Alice in Wonderland remake, and that was just terrible. But
No, I was gonna say that, yeah, like you can tell it is a Tim Burton movie when you see it, but in a way it's just like, even though he takes these big swings, it's like at least he's putting in what everything he has into every movie he does. They don't always succeed, but you know what they are. So
yeah, we must not bury the lead that his Alice in Wonderland remake was just awful, but he's also got Batman 89, Batman Returns, which is a movie that I have grown more love and appreciation for as the years have gone on. Corpse Bride, like I mentioned, that movie is so much better than some people give credit for. So he's got like genuinely some good ones under his belt. I'll take Beetlejuice and then the sequel. Like I enjoyed Beetlejuice more than I was expecting. So Tim Burton can be good at his job, and I would throw Sleepy Hollow in there as well. It's getting an amazing grade from me. It's one of those movies I did not expect to love at first. Loved it when I first saw it, and I gained a new appreciation for it rewatching it for this one. It kind of did okay box office wise. The budget was between about 70 and 100 million and it made 200 million back. So It's not a great commercial success, but it's not like a colossal flop either. But I
Yeah.
think artistically, it's one of his more better films, I would say.
Mm. And also, and another thing kind of relating to that is his lead actor. Johnny Depp is kind of in the same boat. Like, he has some good movies and he has some very bad movies, but this is a movie that, again, that he stars in that not a lot of people talk about, but it's one that people should definitely check out.
I agree. Johnny Depp, like I love I love the first three Pirates of the Caribbean films. Like after At World's End, like if he capped it there, it would be awesome. And then
Yeah.
Stranger Tides and Men Tell No Tales, those were just not great. But Captain Jack Sparrow kind of corrupted this man to where now every role after that is just like Diet Captain Jack Sparrow, like Lone Ranger and Alice in Wonderland and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to a certain extent. But like I tend to forget and I try to tell people Johnny Depp was not always like this. He was actually more complex than that on occasion. He found a niche and he stuck to it. But if I ever do like a Depp project, then I'll explore that evolution. But what did you all think of Sleepy Hollow? Let us know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. Zach, thank you so much for joining me on this. I want to bring you back on someday, but for right now, what have you got coming up?
Not much. Basically, you can find me on Letterboxd and YouTube at MovieFanZ, and I would love to come back and talk more movies.
And you will certainly be back. I will make sure of it. But Zach's got to jump off, but I've got to continue on. Next up, speaking of The World Is Not Enough, the same weekend that Sleepy Hollow came out, The World Is Not Enough came out. So, with that in mind, let's cover number three of Pierce Brosnan's James Bond films, The World Is Not Enough.
The world is not enough.
The World Is Not Enough was directed by Michael Apted, the man who had previously directed Coal Miner's Daughter, the Loretta Lynn biopic, and this is the third of four James Bond films starring Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. Bond is back. This time around, he must save the world from a nuclear explosion, from the hands of a terrorist who cannot feel pain. Through a series of events, this terrorist named Renard was shot in the head and is not dead yet, but is slowly dying. But as the bullet slowly moves through his brain, he slowly begins to lose the ability to feel anything. Also, there is a subplot featuring M doing something very questionable for the sake of a mission involving the King family and specifically the daughter of the dearly departed Roger King named Electra, played by Sophie Marceau. Pierce Brosnan Bond films can best be described as one all-time great, one really underrated one, a really, really terrible one, and The World Is Not Enough. This is the one that no one remembers. And after a fresh rewatch, I can understand why, because with GoldenEye, it's one of the all-time best Bond films because it combines great action with a great story and just has one of the best all-time Bond villains in the form of Sean Bean. And then you got The World Is Not, or Tomorrow Never Dies, excuse me, which is severely underrated, especially not just because of Jonathan Pryce as the villain, but the fact that he is a news mogul who is trying to start World War III. I'm sure there's some relevance there somewhere, but I can't put my finger on why. And then Die Another Day is just awful. For better or worse, each one of Brosnan's Bond films has something going for it, and The World Is Not Enough is just the one that is the one that's in between. And like I said, having freshly rewatched this, I can confirm that, yeah, it's not bad, but it's not particularly outstanding either. It's enjoyable in bursts, though. Really, the best parts of the movie are the beginning and the end. The beginning opening scene in which Bond gets a bunch of money and returns it to MI6, only for it to be a trap, the money exploding, and Bond going after an assassin in a boat. That's a great scene. And then the very end in which Renard is off to set the nuke, only for Bond to stop him. The beginning and the end of this movie are the best parts, and everything in the middle is just kind of mediocre. And I don't want to come across as harsh here. I think Pierce Brosnan does an admirable job. Pierce Brosnan does a really good job as Bond. It's just that some of the material he's given, kind of like Roger Moore, is just subpar. Like subpar is, or I mean, Roger Moore was good as Bond, but he just got some crap material to work with. Not nearly as much as Brosnan, but I mean, die another day. What can I say? When they try to give Bond more of a storyline, especially involving him and Electra King. There's a twist involved in the movie that I figured it out within the first like 15 minutes I saw her on screen. And I'm not some like, look at my script writing brain. Like, no, I'm not like that at all. But as soon as something is established where she was kidnapped and then she broke out of her own volition, I knew something was up, and it didn't take long to figure out the rest. Denise Richards is also in this movie as Dr. Christmas Jones. Well, it gives Pussy Galore a run for its money in terms of weird Bond girl names. But ultimately, Dr. Jones is just kind of there. Like, Denise Richards is fine, but I think they could have done a lot more with that. And really, that's the story of The World Is Not Enough. It's fine in practice, but I feel like they could have done a little bit more with it. I'm going to give it a good rating because the beginning and the end are legitimately a lot of fun. And the rest of the movie, you gotta slog through quite a bit of just stuff. But moving right along, we go from high budget Bond film to a rather low budget TV film. Well, HBO anyway. It's RKO 281.
My name is Orson Welles.
RKO 281, the story of how the greatest film in history almost never made it to the screen.
RKO 281 was directed by Benjamin Ross, and it starred a lot of people, including Liev Schreiber, James Cromwell, Roy Scheider, yes, really, and John Malkovich. It tells the story of the making of Citizen Kane. You may have heard of it. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest movies of all time. Like, regardless of American movies, world movies, it doesn't matter. People on their greatest of all time list, like Roger Ebert, film critics everywhere, Citizen Kane is near or at the top of the list. And this is about the making of the film. It follows Orson Welles, played by Liev Schreiber, who is given a fresh contract at RKO, giving him full creative control to make whatever he wants. And after a rather unpleasant encounter with one William Randolph Hearst, played by James Cromwell, Welles decides that he's going to make a movie lampooning and poking holes in the legacy of one William Randolph Hearst. To make the long story short, William Randolph Hearst owned everything, like pretty much the media, like movies, like studio heads. Like if it was any kind of media, William Randolph Hearst probably owned it back then. But William Randolph Hearst was a bit of a weirdo. He had a big old castle. He had a mistress he kept around but never married. He had odd habits, kind of similar to one Charles Foster Kane. And so Orson Welles took a lot of heavy influence from William Randolph Hearst and put it into Charles Foster Kane. And this does not make Hearst happy in the slightest. I've seen Citizen Kane a couple of times now, and I greatly enjoy it. When people say it's one of the greatest movies of all time, I'm not going to argue with them because it is genuinely like a beautiful film, not just in terms of story, but in terms of just how it looks as well. The movie was way ahead of its time in terms of how it looked and how it told a story in film. Like Orson Welles was playing checkers or was playing chess while the rest of Hollywood was playing checkers. Like no matter what you think of Orson Welles, like that was just the situation. And I think this movie being RKO 281 is really underrated. It really captures what it might have been like for Orson Welles and what he had to go through because it was not fun making Citizen Kane from what I've seen in this movie and what I've researched on my own. And I've seen in some reviews that the movie trumps up certain things for the sake of dramatic effect, but it's a biopic, so that's bound to happen. The key to your enjoyment of this movie really lies in do you like seeing famous things getting made? I do, so I loved this movie. Liev Schreiber was great as Orson Welles. John Malkovich was great as Citizen Kane's screenwriter, Joseph Mankiewicz. I have not seen Mank, so I don't know if that movie is any better, but John Malkovich did a great job of playing Joseph Mankiewicz. Because I've seen quite a bit of Citizen Kane and I've done a little bit of research on my own, I can confirm that there's a lot of William Randolph Hearst in the character, but Orson Welles put a lot of himself into the character as well. It's been rumored that it's more semi-autobiographical, and Orson Welles is obviously no longer with us, so I can't ask him. But there are a lot of elements there as well. And I think what I liked about this movie was that it showed that Wells was pulling from Hearst, but he was also kind of turning into Kane at the same time. It's a bit of a metamorphosis that you really don't see unless you're like looking for it. And the movie really is a tragedy in that Wells does not come out of this like better having made the film and having it get made because number one, it basically burned his relationship with RKO. I mean, RKO pretty much destroyed the next film he made called The Magnificent Ambersons. Side note, a movie needs to be made about the making of The Magnificent Ambersons because that is a drama in and of itself, but I digress. And really, William Randolph Hearst was kind of ruined when this movie got released. He was already on his way out, but the movie did him no favors. My one problem with the movie is that it's way too short. The movie's 84 minutes long and it's made from HBO, so I'm sure time constraints had a bit of a role to play. The movie could have easily been 3 hours and I would have been there day one. I was into it. For that alone, I'm going to give this a great rating, not a full amazing. But this movie is severely underrated and a full-on movie about the making of Citizen Kane is more than overdue, and the Magnificent Ambersons while we're at it. But now let's pivot from the making of Citizen Kane to a movie about a movie about a conservative security guard and a drag queen doing singing lessons together. It's actually good. It's called Flawless.
Flawless.
Most drag queens just want to, parade around looking flawless. I'm an artist.
Flawless was directed by Joel Schumacher.
The Iceman cometh.
Yes, that one. And the movie starred Robert De Niro and Philip Seymour Hoffman. It tells the story of a former police officer played by De Niro, who is pretty much a staunch conservative, but like the cartoony kind of conservative where he hates pretty much anything different, and he lives next door to a couple of drag queens, specifically one named Rusty, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. De Niro hates these people with a burning, fiery passion, but what happens to him is that he suffers a stroke and can't speak. Well, can't speak very well anyway, and so it is recommended that he take singing lessons in order to improve his speaking. And so he turns to Rusty to help him, and the two get along just as well as you might imagine. I've already covered one of Schumacher's films for the 99 Project in the form of 8mm, and I greatly enjoyed this one. I don't know if I like Flawless more than 8mm, but the movie is honestly better than I was expecting. And it really comes down to the dynamic between De Niro and Philip Seymour Hoffman. I mean, first of all, consider the acting heavyweights there. You got Robert De Niro, we all know who he is. And Philip Seymour Hoffman, I'm convinced, just never had a bad performance. So the two of them playing off of one another, being diametrically opposite in every single form and fashion, that was the best part of the movie. The thing that hinders the movie from me going beyond the score I'm going to give it is that there are subplots that I just think felt pretty contrived. There's a whole thing in which an accident happens in which it causes De Niro's character to have a stroke, but then there's like a separate thing related to it where there's a lot of stolen money involved. And there's also gangsters involved too, and I just never really liked that. I liked when it was more of the human side of De Niro and Hoffman trying to work together to get De Niro's character's voice back up and running again. Legit, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Rusty's trying to teach De Niro this one song called and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a very wordy song, and so it's supposed to get De Niro to like move his mouth like quite a bit. It's like Banana, Bonana, like one of those songs. And the struggle they have to go through to get through it, I thought was very enjoyable to watch. I'm going to give this a good rating, but a high good rating. Again, the movie has subplots that I didn't really care about personally, but outside of that, this proves once again that Joel Schumacher was not just,
You are not sending me to the cooler.
he was much better than what people give him credit for. But I only have a couple more left, so let's keep on keeping on, starting off with an adaptation of a Jane Austen book called Mansfield Park.
Fanny, you are killing me.
Mansfield Park.
Mansfield Park was directed by Patricia Rozema. I think I got that right the first time, and it is based on the Jane Austen book of the same name. It tells the story of a woman named Fanny Price, who grows up very poor but is sent away to her relatives in the very expensive part of England in an estate called Mansfield Park. Over the course of time, she learns how to become one of them. But when she is asked to marry a man that she does not love, he leaves the family, or she leaves the family behind, and so is then convinced to move back after an accident. And the movie covers, over the years, Fanny Price's ways and means of trying to stay true to herself while also helping out her immediate family and pleasing her other loved ones. On one of the Hidden Gems podcast episodes I was a part of, Rachel from Rachel's Reviews recommended this really highly. And now that I've actually seen it, I was not disappointed. The movie was better than I was expecting. And I say that because normally this is a movie that I like run immediately towards, but the movie really worked for me. And I think it really comes down to my likability of the Fanny Price character, played in this movie by Frances O'Connor. I thought Fanny Price was just great. She has a sort of integrity about her that is often remarked upon in the movie, but I think what I loved the most about said integrity was that she would not compromise for anything. She is asked to marry a man that she does not love and pretty much calls him an egotist and just does not like him at all. And when the family's like, you don't want to marry him, well, then you gotta leave. And she's like, show me the door. And so she leaves and she moves back and she doesn't whine or complain or have a moan. She has a cry about it, but then she picks herself up and she presses on. The movie looks stellar as well. Like Mansfield Park clearly must have been in the same neighborhood as Downton Abbey because you look at it and you just go, there is no right that England should be this beautiful. But it is, and it really shines like a diamond in the cinematography department. For me personally, I'm not a huge like Jane Austen expert or a super fan necessarily, but I greatly enjoyed this one. I'm going to give this a good rating, but a high good rating. And I imagine that if you're really into Jane Austen, this is really high up there on your list of favorite adaptations. But now let's get into from Jane Austen adaptation to very serious Civil War film, Ride with the Devil.
I felt free. Ride with the Devil.
Ride with the Devil was directed by Ang Lee, director of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and that one Hulk movie that nobody likes. And it starred Tobey Maguire, James Caviezel, not Jim Caviezel, Skeet Ulrich, and Jeffrey Wright, and it is based on the book of the same name. It tells the story of a group of, I guess, soon-to-be Confederate soldiers, the main character of whom is played by Tobey Maguire. This movie takes place in or around the mid to late 1850s and into the 1860s, specifically in the Kansas-Nebraska area. See, the Civil War was a really, really bad thing. And so, to make a long story short, the movie covers this group of soldiers who are living, working on that border while competing against the Union soldiers that are called Jayhawkers. This is a movie that I had not even heard of, let alone seen. I had, like when I came across this, I'm like, wait a minute, Ang Lee directed this? And sure enough, he did. Not only did Ang Lee direct this, but Tobey Maguire starred in it, as well as Jim Caviezel before Passion of the Christ. He was called James Caviezel in this, which is just crazy to me to think about. But Jeffrey Wright is also in this. Skeet Ulrich is in this. Like, just it's a really good cast, and so I was going into it really excited. And the movie's not the movie's just kind of there for me. It's not bad by any means. You can tell there is effort put forth into this, but I feel like a lot of things were missing here. Naturally, the acting is solid as a rock across the board. Tobey Maguire and Jim Caviezel, both are particularly great. Jeffrey Wright is predictably great as well. It's well acted, it's well shot. There are some genuinely really good looking action scenes. I think my problem with the movie lies in the tone and the pacing, because this movie is an hour and 30 is 2 hours and about 18-ish minutes long. It did not need to be that long. If it was going to be that long, you need to move on at a bit of more of a brisk pace. I feel like the movie fails because it tries to be so serious and trying to capture that these basically Confederate soldiers, I guess, had feelings too, and they weren't really as fan of war as the next guy, so they're trying to grapple with this just as everyone. There's a nice story to be found there, but I feel like it got lost in the sauce a little bit, and I don't necessarily suggest that the movie should have been like a complete revision. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying you can be truthful to historical events and exciting. But the movie really didn't, it chose to be thought-provoking rather than entertaining, if that makes any sense at all. It's a movie that I respect more than I like. Like, I respect that it exists and that it got made, but honestly, the movie is pretty forgettable. And it's a bit of a shame because there is clearly effort put forth into this, and I think that there are genuinely some good thoughts and moments to be had here, but unfortunately, it just can't comes across as more of a history lecture, the boring kind, more than a theatrical experience, I guess. To close things out on this Black Friday edition of the 99 Project, I'm so excited that I get to be able to say these words. Let's talk about Toy Story 2.
Toy Story 2.
Ride like the wind, bullseye!
Toy Story 2 was directed by John Lasseter. It is the second Toy Story film, and I guess the soon-to-be quintology of the Toy Story films. I think Toy Story 5 is still a thing, unfortunately. But it was the second film in the overall franchise and the third overall film released by Pixar. Andy's toys are back. This time around, Woody is captured, I guess, or toy-napped would be a better use, by a man named Al, who is a mascot and runs Al's Toy Barn, where you can buy toys for a buck, buck, buck. I know I had to squeeze in the reference in there somewhere. But when Woody is toy-napped, he soon finds out that he is not alone, and as a matter of fact, he is a part of a set of a group of cowboy toys that were a part of a kids' television show called Woody's Roundup. You got a horse named Bullseye, you got a prospector named Stinky Pete, played by Kelsey Grammer, and you got Jessie the Cowgirl, voiced by Joan Cusack. And it's up to Andy's toys, led this time around by Buzz Lightyear, reprised by Tim Allen, to try and find Woody. But Woody has a difficult choice to make in that he has to say to himself, do I want to stay with my Roundup friends, knowing full well that I'll be beloved by kids forever, albeit behind a pane of glass in a museum in Japan? Or do I want to stay with Andy, knowing full well that I will be forgotten? This is why Pixar hits different, folks, because you can get a movie like Toy Story 2, where it has heavy themes like that with big existential dread, sandwiched in between beautiful music numbers, specifically When She Loved Me, excuse me, by Sarah McLachlan, and Buzz Lightyear, who basically is off on his own arc, parodying The Empire Strikes Back. Quite really, Pixar was never like hitting these highs like after Toy Story 2. I've said it in other places, but I'm gonna say it right here and now. Toy Story 2 is the best thing that Pixar has ever done. Now, before you come at me with your Incredibles or your ups, please let me explain myself. I'm somebody who believes that Pixar has something of a near perfect track record. They've had their duds, sure, but overall, they've rarely missed as a studio, in my opinion, personally. So believe me when I say that when their worst movies are at the very least watchable, that's a sign that Pixar has a near flawless track record. And Pixar never got as good as when they did Toy Story 2. And I mean that with all sincerity. We all have our favorites, but in my opinion, Toy Story 2 is my favorite and the absolute best. And it really comes down to, like I talked about, the movie is deep. It deals with Woody dealing with these feelings of, do I stay or do I go? To quote The Clash. Do I go with Jessie, knowing full well that Jessie wants to be beloved by children because she was abandoned by her child and left to rot pretty much? Does he listen to the prospector, knowing that he's not exactly on the up and on the right side of things? Does Woody stay with Andy, knowing full well that Andy will grow up and move on? Which is exactly what happens in Toy Story 3. Like, what does Woody do? And there's not really an easy answer there. There's appealing factors on both sides because when you're in a museum, you're beloved by millions, but you're never really played with, and a toy's purpose is to be played with. So it's a question of what do you do in that moment? And for a movie directed primarily at kids, but families, but primarily kids, Pixar never got this deep again, in my opinion, and they never really hit that high again. This is a movie that I would recommend to almost anyone. It's dark, but it's light. It's heavy, but it's also can be very silly and very lighthearted. It's everything and all of that, and then some and more. It's getting an amazing grade. I mean, if somehow you've never seen the movie, watch it. Do yourself a favor and watch it, especially with its 25-year anniversary. Like, do yourself a favor and watch it. But what did you all think of any of the movies I've talked about? Let me know in the comments. I would love to read what you have to say. Thank you to Zach from the channel Movie Fan Z for joining me to talk about Sleepy Hollow, and I look forward to having him back on the channel very soon. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.